She did not cry when she heard him say it. Crying was a luxury afforded to women who believed their feelings held currency, who expected their pain to be witnessed and, perhaps, redeemed. Philippa Caldwell had long ago learned that her own emotional economy was a closed system, its assets and liabilities managed in the silent ledger of her own heart. She stood in the narrow passage between the library and the main hall of Vellacour House, the scent of beeswax and old paper clinging to her gray dress, a scent she had always associated with sanctuary. Now, it felt like the dust of her own erasure. The Earl of Marlowe, Alastair Thornfield, stood not 20 feet away, his back to her, his profile limned by the candlelight of the drawing-room. He was speaking to Sir Warwick Frome, a man whose primary occupation was the enthusiastic assessment of other men's horses and fortunes. They were discussing the impending necessity of Alastair's marriage. Lady Eugenia Ingram's name had been mentioned, a name that glittered in the county with the cold, hard brilliance of a diamond. "She is a fine match, of course," Sir Warwick was saying, his voice a low rumble of masculine approval. "Beauty, connections, a temperament suited to high society." "Indeed." Alastair's voice was cool, measured, the tone he used for estate business and matters of settled fact. A practical alliance. "And what of Miss Caldwell?" Sir Warwick asked, a note of idle curiosity in his voice. "She has been here forever, has she not? The old Earl's ward, a fixture." The word hung in the air, small and dense as a lead weight. Philippa felt it land somewhere deep inside her. A fixture. Like the grandfather clock in the hall, or the threadbare Aubusson carpet. A thing of use and familiarity, but a thing nonetheless. Then came Alastair's reply, the sentence that would sever the last, tender thread of hope she had unknowingly allowed to remain. "Miss Caldwell is a responsibility," he said, his voice devoid of malice, but freighted with a weariness that was somehow worse. "A duty I inherited, along with the death duties and the leaking roof. One does not consider the character of a chair, one simply ensures it is not broken." She did not move. She did not even, she thought, breathe. The comparison was so apt, so brutally precise, that it almost commanded a kind of respect. He had seen her exactly as she was in his world, an object, a piece of furniture left behind, to be maintained, but not considered. The years she had spent cataloging the Vellacour library, her painstaking work to bring order to centuries of chaotic estate records, her quiet, fierce love for this house of stone and memory, all of it amounted to the sturdiness of a chair. She waited until they moved on, their conversation turning to crop yields and the price of grain, before she turned and walked back into the library. The great room was silent, save for the soft sigh of the dying fire. The air was cool. She ran a hand along the spine of a book, its leather worn smooth by generations of hands. For 10 years, since her father's death had left her orphaned and in the care of the previous Earl, this room had been her world. She had believed she was its keeper, its memory. She saw now that she was merely another one of its artifacts, to be dusted and occasionally polished, but never truly valued. Her love for Alastair, a feeling she had nurtured in the deepest, most secret part of herself, felt suddenly like a species of madness. It was a wildflower she had cultivated in a dungeon, a thing that could never survive the light of day. He had been kind to her, in a distant, lord of the manor way. He had praised her meticulous work on the archives, had thanked her for untangling a particularly snarled set of tenant ledgers. She had mistaken this professional courtesy for a glimmer of personal regard. She had mistaken his shared silence in this room, as he worked at his desk and she at hers, for a form of companionship. She had been a fool. She sat at the large oak table that served as her desk. Before her lay the inventory of the East Wing's correspondence, her handwriting a neat, forward-slanting script across the page. Her work. The one thing that was undeniably hers. Her competence. It was the only thing of value she possessed, and he had just unknowingly confirmed it was all he saw. A decision, cold and clear, settled over her. It was not a storm of passion, but a quiet, chilling frost. She would not confront him. She would not make a scene. To do so would be to grant him the power to dismiss her pain as feminine hysterics. Instead, she would finish her work. She would complete the cataloging of the entire Velicor collection. She would prepare the final estate ledgers for the year. She would make herself utterly, perfectly redundant. And then she would leave. She would walk away from Velicor House without a single backward glance, leaving behind nothing but the impeccable order she had created. It would be a departure as quiet and unnoticed as her presence had been. Her final act of service would be to unburden him of his responsibility. She would, in essence, break herself, so he no longer had to ensure she was not broken. In the months that followed, a strange and austere peace descended upon Philippa. Grief, she discovered, could be a formidable engine. It burned clean and hot, consuming all the frivolous distractions of hope and leaving behind only the stark, clear lines of purpose. She worked with a focused intensity that bordered on obsession. She rose before the sun, her footsteps echoing in the cold, silent corridors of the great house, and she was often the last to extinguish her lamp, long after the rest of the household was asleep. The Velicor archives, a sprawling, chaotic testament to 3 centuries of aristocratic life, became her dominion. She was not merely an archivist. She was a necromancer, summoning the ghosts of the past and compelling them into orderly lines. She deciphered the crabbed handwriting of a 17th-century matriarch, cross-referencing household accounts with personal letters to reveal a hidden story of debt and devotion. She pieced together fragmented maps of the estate, revealing forgotten property lines and water rights that had been lost to time. Her work was a silent conversation with the dead, and she found them, on the whole, to be better company than the living. Her interactions with Alistair became models of detached professionalism. She would leave summaries of her progress on his desk each morning, her reports concise and impersonal. If he sought her out in the library to ask a question, she would stand, answer him clearly and without embellishment, and then sit back down, her pen already poised over her work. She did not offer opinions unless asked. She did not smile. She was the perfect secretary, the perfect archivist, the perfect chair. He seemed, at first, not to notice the change. He was preoccupied with his own duties, the management of the home farm, negotiations with his London bankers, and the slow, formal courtship of Lady Eugenia Ingram. But gradually, the silence from her side of the library began to register. The room had once held a quiet, companionable atmosphere. Now, it was simply quiet. He found himself pausing, listening for the small sounds that had once punctuated their shared space. The soft scratch of her pen, the rustle of a turning page, the occasional, almost inaudible sigh of concentration. The absence of these things was a presence in itself. One afternoon, in late autumn, Philippa uncovered something significant. While reconciling the estate's lease agreements with the tithe maps from the previous century, she discovered a parcel of land, nearly 200 acres of valuable pasture bordering the river, that had been leased to a neighboring estate, the Ingram lands, for a peppercorn rent 99 years prior. The lease had expired 3 years ago, but the payments had continued at the same negligible rate, and no one had noticed. The land, by right, should have reverted to Velicor, or been renegotiated at a modern and substantial rate. It was a discovery that would change the financial fortunes of the estate. For a moment, a flicker of the old Philippa surfaced, a triumphant urge to stride into Alastair's study and lay the discovery before him, to see the surprise and admiration in his eyes. But the urge died as quickly as it arose. What would be the point? It would only reinforce her utility. Instead, she prepared a calm, factual memorandum, citing the relevant documents and outlining the legal position. She included a draft of a letter to the Ingram estate's solicitors. She left it, as always, on his desk for him to find in the morning. Her own future was beginning to take shape. During a visit from the estate's solicitor, Mr. Earl, a kind, scholarly man with eyes that saw more than most, she had made a quiet inquiry about opportunities for someone with her skills. He had been surprised, then intrigued. He recognized the quality of her mind, the formidable intelligence that lay behind her quiet demeanor. He treated her not as a fixture, but as a colleague. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived for her. It was an offer of a position to organize and catalog the vast, neglected library of a dowager countess in the West Riding. The salary was modest, but it was a salary. It was independence. It was a life beyond the walls of Velicor. She wrote back the same day, accepting the position. Her departure was set for the 1st of December. She had 6 weeks to finish her work. Alastair read Philippa's memorandum on the Ingram lease with a growing sense of astonishment. The clarity of her research, the precision of her argument. It was not just competent, it was brilliant. The discovery would net the estate an income that would solve most of his immediate financial pressures. It was a lifeline, and she had handed it to him without a word of self-congratulation. He sought her out in the library, the memorandum in his hand. "Miss Caldwell," he began, his voice holding a note of genuine warmth. "This is extraordinary. I cannot thank you enough." She looked up from her work, her expression placid. "I am pleased it is of use to you, my lord. It is my job to ensure the archives are in order." Her formality was a stone wall. He tried again. "This is more than order. This is a work of profound diligence. You have saved this estate a great deal of money." "The estate is worthy of the effort," she replied, her gaze steady. There was no artifice in her, no false modesty. She simply stated it as a fact. He felt a strange sense of frustration. He wanted to see a flicker of pleasure, a sign that his praise had landed. But her composure was absolute. He was the Earl of Marlow, a man accustomed to deference, to people seeking his approval. This quiet, unassuming woman in a plain gray dress was somehow rendering him powerless with her simple, unadorned dignity. "You must allow me to offer you a bonus," he said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Some tangible recognition of this service." A faint, almost imperceptible tightening around her mouth was her only reaction. "That is not necessary, my lord. Your father's generosity to me after my own father's death has been more than recompense enough. I am merely settling my account. Settling her account. The phrase was odd, final. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in months. He noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the almost translucent quality of her skin. She had grown thinner, but there was a new stillness in her, a self-possession that had not been there before. The shy, watchful young woman he had taken for granted was gone. In her place was a woman of quiet, unshakable resolve, and he had no idea what had forged it. The matter of the Ingram lease brought Lady Eugenia to Velacour more frequently. The land in question had long been considered part of her family's estate, and while the legal position was unassailable, the situation required delicate social management. Alistair found himself observing her through a new lens. She was, as Sir Warwick had noted, beautiful and well-connected. She knew precisely how to charm a room, how to flatter, how to wield her social power with the grace of a master swordswoman. But when Alistair tried to explain the details of the lease agreement, her eyes glazed over. "Dearest Alistair," she said, placing a perfectly gloved hand on his arm, "surely these are matters for solicitors and land agents. It is all so terribly tedious. Let us speak of the winter ball in London." He looked from her artfully arranged smile to the memory of Philippa's clear, intelligent gaze as she had once explained the complexities of crop rotation to him. Eugenia saw Velacour as a backdrop for her social ambitions, a title to be worn. Philippa, he was beginning to realize, saw it as a living entity, a complex web of history, land, and people that required care and understanding. The contrast was thrown into sharp relief a few days later. Eugenia, bored while Alistair was occupied with the estate manager, decided to amuse herself by improving the library. She swept into the room with the air of a conquering general, declaring it dusty and drab. Philippa was working at her table, cataloging the final folio of family correspondence. "Good heavens, Miss Caldwell, must you always be buried in here?" Eugenia said, her voice tinkling with false brightness. "We must have some light, some air. And these books, they are so dreadfully disorganized. I shall have the footman rearrange them by color. It will be so much more pleasing to the eye." Philippa looked up, her expression unreadable. "The books are organized by subject and date of acquisition, Lady Eugenia. It is the standard system for a collection of this size and significance." Eugenia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, how very serious you are! But it is so dreary. A library should be a place of beauty, not a dusty old workshop. We shall start with this wall." She gestured vaguely, a command disguised as a suggestion. "I would advise against it," Philippa said, her voice quiet but firm. "To remove the books from their current order would be to destroy a century of scholarly work. It would render the catalogue I have spent the last year creating entirely useless." Eugenia's eyes narrowed. She was not accustomed to being contradicted, especially by someone she considered little more than a servant. "Nonsense," she snapped, her veneer of charm cracking. "You are the Earl's ward, I believe? A dependent. You will find it is my wishes that carry weight here now." She turned to the door, calling for a footman. At that moment, Alistair entered the library. He took in the scene at a glance. Eugenia, imperious and flushed with anger. Philippa, pale but resolute, standing before her desk as if guarding a fortress. "Eugenia," he said, his voice dangerously soft. What is the meaning of this? Alistair, I was just explaining to Miss Caldwell my plans to make this dreary room more presentable. She is being most obstinate. Alistair's gaze moved to Philippa. He saw the faint tremor in her hands, which were clasped tightly before her. He saw the fierce, protective light in her eyes as she looked at the shelves of books. And he saw, with a sudden sickening clarity, the dynamic at play. The casual cruelty of the powerful and the dignified endurance of the powerless. The phrase, "the character of a chair," echoed in his mind, and for the first time, it filled him with a profound sense of shame. He turned back to Eugenia, his expression cold as winter stone. "Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice ringing with an authority he rarely used, "is the curator of this library. Her authority on matters concerning this collection is absolute. It will not be questioned. The books will remain as they are." He did not raise his voice, but the finality in his tone was unmistakable. Eugenia stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. To be publicly countermanded in favor of a paid companion was an insult of the highest order. A dark flush crept up her neck. "The library," Alistair continued, his eyes never leaving Eugenia's, "is not a drawing room for you to redecorate at your whim. It is the heart of this house. Miss Caldwell understands that. I am beginning to think you do not." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken things. Eugenia, for perhaps the first time in her life, was rendered speechless. She gathered the tattered remnants of her dignity, shot Philippa a look of pure venom, and swept from the room. Alistair turned to Philippa. He expected to see triumph, or at least relief. Instead, he saw only a deep, bone-weary sadness in her eyes. "Thank you, my lord," she said quietly. She then sat down at her desk, picked up her pen, and returned to her work, as if nothing had happened. The wall between them, he realized, was now higher and more impenetrable than ever. He had defended her, but he had the unsettling feeling that it was far, far too late. The 1st of December arrived with a whisper of snow, the flakes dusting the stark black branches of the oaks in the park. The world outside Vellacour was muted, hushed, as if holding its breath. Inside the library, Philippa's work was done. The final volume of the catalogue, bound in dark green leather, sat in the center of her perfectly cleared desk. Every letter, every ledger, every map belonging to the Thornfield family was accounted for, its place in history secured. Her account was settled. She had spent the previous evening packing her single trunk. There was not much to pack. A few plain dresses, her father's worn copy of Virgil, a small box containing a pair of simple pearl earrings that had been her mother's. She moved with a quiet efficiency that left no room for sentiment. To feel would be to falter, and she could not afford to falter now. Her last task was to write the note. She had rehearsed the words in her head 100 times. It needed to be polite, formal, and final. It must contain no hint of accusation, no trace of the pain that had driven her to this. It must be a note worthy of a piece of furniture that had decided, quietly, to remove itself. She took a single sheet of Vellacour's heavy, cream-colored paper. Her penmanship, as always, was flawless. My Lord Marlowe, my work on the Vellacour archives is now complete. The final catalogue is on the desk for your attention. The position I have occupied in this house is therefore redundant. I have accepted a situation elsewhere and will be departing this morning. I am deeply grateful for the sanctuary offered to me by your late father, and by you. Please consider my work on the archives as the final settlement of that debt of gratitude. She paused, the pen hovering over the paper. The words were cold, correct, and empty. They were a lie. Her work had not been the settlement of a debt. It had been an act of love. A fierce, unrequited, and utterly hopeless love for this house and for the man who was its master. Some small, defiant part of her soul insisted on a single, honest sentence. She dipped the pen in the ink once more. I wish Vellacour, and you, all the happiness you deserve. She signed it simply, Philippa Caldwell. She folded the note and placed it beside the newly bound catalogue. She looked around the library one last time, the shelves of books standing like silent, faithful friends. She did not allow herself a single tear. Her grief was a private country, and she was its sole inhabitant. The house was still dark and silent when she crept down the servants' staircase. Nan, her maid for the past 5 years, and a woman of few words and profound loyalty, was waiting in the kitchen. She held a small bundle of bread and cheese and a heavy woolen cloak. She did not ask any questions. She had seen the shadows under Philippa's eyes grow deeper over the months. She had seen the light go out of them. Her silence was a form of blessing. "The carrier is waiting at the crossroads, miss," Nan whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "He'll take you to Shrewsbury to catch the morning coach." Philippa took the cloak, its familiar weight a small comfort. "Thank you, Nan, for everything." The maid simply nodded, her eyes shining in the dim light. She unbolted the kitchen door, the sound unnaturally loud in the sleeping house. A gust of cold, snow-scented air swirled in. Philippa stepped out into the pre-dawn gloom, pulled the hood of her cloak over her head, and walked away from the only home she had ever truly known. Her footsteps quickly covered by the falling snow. Alistair awoke with a sense of unease. The house was too quiet. It was a silence that felt different from the usual morning hush, a hollow, empty quality that settled in his bones. He dressed quickly and went down, foregoing his usual breakfast in the dining room. He had a question for Miss Caldwell about a letter from his solicitor, a small point of clarification she would undoubtedly be able to answer in an instant. He pushed open the heavy oak door to the library. The room was cold, the fire in the grate nothing but gray ash. And her desk, it was empty. Not just unoccupied, but utterly bare, scrubbed clean of the familiar, orderly clutter of her work. No stacks of books, no inkwell, no neat piles of paper. There was only a single, large, leather-bound volume and a folded sheet of paper resting beside it. A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, pierced through him. He walked to the desk. He picked up the folded note. His name was written on the front in her elegant script. He unfolded it. The words were few, and their formality was more chilling than any tirade. My work is complete. The position is redundant. I have accepted a situation elsewhere. He read it once, then again. The phrase, settlement of that debt of gratitude, felt like a slap. Had she truly seen her years here as nothing more than a debt to be paid? His gaze fell on the final line. I wish Vellacour, and you, all the happiness you deserve. The sentence was a masterpiece of ambiguity. It could be a simple, polite sentiment, or it could be a curse, a quiet, devastating judgment on what he, in fact, deserved. He reached for the leather-bound volume. It was the catalogue. He opened it. On the first page, in lieu of a formal dedication, was a preface written in her hand. It was not about him or his family. It was about the library itself. "A house is not merely stone and timber," she had written. "It is a vessel for memory." This collection tells the story of Vellacour, not just its triumphs, but its sorrows, its follies, its quiet moments of grace. It is the story of the women who managed its accounts from this room, the children who learned their letters from these books, the men who read of war and philosophy by this fire. My father taught me that to love a place is to learn its stories. It has been my privilege to be the custodian of these. He sank into the chair at his own desk, the book open in his hands. He read the words again, and the entire edifice of his understanding collapsed. The cool, efficient archivist, the quiet dependent, the fixture, the chair. It was all a fiction he had constructed out of his own blindness. This woman, this quiet, brilliant woman, had loved this house with a depth and passion he had never even suspected. She hadn't been settling a debt. She had been offering a gift, and he had thrown it away. His mind replayed the last few months, her withdrawal, her impenetrable politeness, her quiet endurance of Eugenia's cruelty. He saw it all now, not as the behavior of a timid servant, but as the actions of a woman with a broken heart, salvaging the last of her pride. The memory of his own words to Sir Warwick returned to him. So clear and sharp, it was as if he had just spoken them. One does not consider the character of a chair. A wave of self-loathing, so intense it was physically sickening, washed over him. He had taken her devotion for granted, her competence as his due, her presence as a piece of the architecture. He had judged her silence as emptiness, when all along it had been filled with a love she believed he was incapable of seeing. And she was right. He had been incapable. His own past wound, a youthful engagement to a woman who had proven to be a mercenary flirt, had made him a coward. He had mistaken Philippa's genuine, quiet nature for the same kind of trap, and in his cynical pride, he had inflicted a wound far deeper than the one he had received. The final sentence of her note echoed in his head. "All the happiness you deserve." He deserved none of this. He deserved this cold, empty room. He deserved the loss of the only person who had ever truly understood the soul of his home. But a sudden, fierce rebellion rose in him. He would not accept it. He would not let her disappear into the snow, believing herself to be nothing to him. He strode into the hall, shouting for the stables. "My horse! Saddle Apollo, now!" Not the carriage. This was not a formal errand. This was a pursuit. This was a desperate, belated attempt to undo the greatest mistake of his life. The ride was a frantic, punishing gallop through the snow-dusted lanes of Shropshire. The cold air burned Alistair's lungs, but he barely felt it. His mind was a maelstrom of regret and a single, desperate hope. Every hoofbeat on the frozen ground seemed to hammer home the same word. Fool, fool, fool. He had been so consumed by the memory of a past betrayal that he had failed to recognize the quiet, steadfast loyalty that had been in front of him all along. He had mistaken strength for servitude and dignity for detachment. He had built a fortress around his heart and called it principle. He had told himself he needed a practical, emotionless alliance, a wife who would be a partner in social and financial matters, nothing more. He saw now that it was a lie he had told himself to avoid the risk of being hurt again. He had wanted a wife he did not have to love because he was terrified of loving. And in his cowardice, He had trampled on a love that was real, a love given freely and without expectation. He urged his horse faster, his eyes scanning the road ahead. He did not even know for certain which way she had gone, but he gambled on the road to Shrewsbury, the main coaching route to the north. Every passing minute felt like an hour, every mile a league. The world had narrowed to this single, desperate purpose: to find her, to say the words he should have said months, years ago. He saw the coaching inn at last, its sign creaking in the wind, a plume of smoke rising from its chimney. A handful of horses were tied to the post outside, and a large, lumbering mail coach was being prepared for departure. He scanned the small crowd of travelers huddled against the cold, and then he saw her. She was standing slightly apart from the others, her back to him, her small trunk at her feet. She was looking down the road, away from Vellacourt. He dismounted, his legs unsteady, and threw the reins to a stable boy. He walked towards her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Miss Caldwell," he said. His voice was rough, hoarse. Philippa froze. She had thought herself beyond his reach, beyond the sound of that voice. She turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. She pulled the hood of her cloak tighter, a small, instinctive gesture of self-protection. "My lord," she said, her voice a bare whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came for you," he said simply. He stopped a few feet from her, not wanting to crowd her, to intimidate her. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, and it cut him to the quick. "I read your note, and the preface to the catalogue." She said nothing, her gaze fixed on his face, her expression guarded. "I was a fool, Philippa," he said, using her given name for the first time. The sound of it felt both strange and profoundly right on his tongue. "A blind, arrogant fool. What I said that night, the things you overheard, there is no excuse for them. They were cruel and untrue, and I am ashamed, deeply ashamed." She looked away, towards the waiting coach. "Your apology is accepted, my lord, but it changes nothing. I have a position to go to." "Is that what you want?" he pressed, taking a step closer. "To go and catalogue another man's library? To spend your life in the service of other people's memories?" "It is a respectable life," she said, her chin lifting with a spark of defiance. "It is an independent life." "I am not offering you dependence," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I am not asking you to come back to be my archivist. Vellacourt needs you, yes. It is a lesser place without you. Its heart is gone. But that is not why I am here." He paused, gathering his courage. This was the precipice. "I am here because I need you. I have been living in a ghost story of my own making, haunted by the past. I let it blind me. I did not see you. I did not see your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I did not see that you were the true heart of the house and of my life. I am asking you to come back, Philippa. Not as my ward, not as my secretary. Come back as my wife, as the Countess of Marlowe, as my partner, as my equal in all things." The proposal hung in the cold air between them, stunning her into silence. The coach horn blew, a shrill, impatient sound. The other passengers began to climb aboard. Philippa stared at him, her mind reeling. This was impossible. This was a scene from a novel, not from her sober, sensible life. "Why?" she whispered, the single word encompassing a universe of doubt. "Why now?" Is this pity? Guilt? A sudden appreciation for a competent housekeeper? The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself. He did not flinch. He deserved it. It is none of those things, he said, his gaze unwavering. It is revelation. Reading your words, I finally understood. I understood what you gave to Velikor, and I understood what I had lost. I don't know if I can claim to love you, Philippa, because I am not sure a man as blind as I have been is worthy of using that word. But I know this. The thought of a future without you in it is unbearable. It is a gray, empty vista. I want to earn the right to love you. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you thought I was, the man you might have loved. He had said it. The man you might have loved. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, the truth of his words landing. The coachman shouted a final warning. It was now or never. "Don't go," Alistair said, his voice breaking. "Please, come home." Philippa looked from his earnest, anguished face to the coach that represented her new life, her independence, her escape from the pain of unrequited love. To go was safe. To stay, to trust him now, was the greatest risk she could possibly take. Her entire life she had chosen safety, endurance, the quiet path. For the first time, she considered choosing the terrifying, uncertain path of hope. She looked into his eyes and saw not the proud, distant Earl, but a man humbled, a man laid bare. She saw a truth there she could not deny. And in that moment, she made her choice. She gave the coachman a small, apologetic shake of her head and turned back to Alistair. "If I return," she said, her voice low but clear, "it will not be as it was. Everything must be different." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over him. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear to you, Philippa, everything will be different." The return to Velikor was a quiet, tentative affair. Alistair did not press her, did not crowd her with protestations. He gave her space, his actions speaking louder than any words could. He had her belongings moved from the small Spartan room in the servants' wing to a sun-filled suite of rooms overlooking the gardens, the rooms that had belonged to his own mother. He dismissed Lady Eugenia with a cold, final letter that left no room for negotiation, the news of their broken understanding spreading through the county with predictable speed. Philippa, for her part, did not immediately fall into the role of Lady of the Manor. The armor she had worn for so long could not be shed in a day. She was watchful, cautious, her heart still tender from its wound. She needed more than a proposal born of panicked regret. She needed proof of a fundamental change. The proof came in small, quiet moments. One afternoon he found her in the library, not at her old desk, but simply reading by the fire. He did not ask her about estate matters. Instead, he pulled up a chair and asked her about the book she was reading. He listened, truly listened, as she spoke of Roman poetry, her face animated with a passion he had never seen before. Another day, he came to her with a set of architectural drawings. "The West Wing roof," he said, spreading them out on the table. "The cost of repair is staggering. I wanted your opinion on the matter." He wasn't asking for her secretarial skills. He was asking for her counsel, as a partner. They spent the entire evening poring over the plans, their heads bent close together, the conversation easy and equal. The turning point came a week after her return. He entered the library to find her standing before the large estate map, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I was thinking," she began, without preamble, "about the Ingram lease. The land is ours, but the tenants who have worked it for generations consider themselves Ingram people. To simply raise the rents to market value would be unjust. It would punish them for a mistake made by their landlords a century ago." He came to stand beside her. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice gentle. "A gradual increase," she said, tracing a line on the map with her finger. "Phased in over 5 years. And we should invest in improving their cottages, draining the lower fields. We should show them that being a Velicor tenant is an advantage, not a penalty. It is about more than profit. It is about responsibility." He looked at her, at the fierce intelligence and profound decency in her face, and a feeling of overwhelming love, clear and undeniable, washed over him. This was the woman he had almost lost. This was the character he had been too blind to see. "You are right," he said softly. "Of course you are right." He reached out and, for the first time, took her hand. Her fingers were cool, but they did not pull away. "Philippa," he said, his voice husky, "I did not know it was possible to love someone's mind, their very soul, before I knew you. I love you, not for what you do for Velicor, but for who you are. Will you do me the honor of believing me?" She looked down at their joined hands, then up into his eyes. The last of the ice around her heart melted away. She saw the truth there, hard-won and shining. "Yes, Alistair," she whispered. "I believe you." He did not kiss her then. Instead, he brought her hand to his lips and held it there, a silent vow of reverence and respect. In the quiet of the library, surrounded by the stories of the past, their own story was finally, truly beginning. He then walked to his desk, unlocked a small drawer, and took out a heavy iron key. He walked back to her and pressed it into her palm. It was the key to the estate office, to his private study. It was a symbol of absolute trust. "Velicor is ours, Philippa," he said, "to manage together." She closed her fingers around the key, its cold weight a promise of a warm and shared future. 3 years later, the library at Velicor House was bathed in the warm golden light of a late summer afternoon. The room was no longer a silent, sterile workshop, but the living heart of the home. A fire crackled in the hearth, warding off the first chill of evening, and the scent of beeswax mingled with the perfume of roses from the bowl on the mantelpiece. Philippa, now the Countess of Marlowe, sat at the large oak table. But she was not working on ledgers. She was reading aloud to her son, a sturdy 1-year-old with his father's dark hair and her own serious gray eyes, who was sitting happily in her lap, batting at the pages of a picture book. Alistair stood by the window, watching them. A smile touched his lips, a gentle, easy expression that had long since replaced the guarded austerity of the past. The estate was thriving, not through some miraculous windfall, but through years of patient, intelligent work, managed jointly by him and his wife. The tenants on the former Ingram lands were prosperous and loyal, their cottages repaired, their fields drained. Velicor was a place of warmth, of life, of quiet, steady prosperity. He never tired of watching her. In the early days of their marriage, he had been afraid that the demands of her new role would somehow diminish the woman he had fallen in love with, that the Countess would eclipse the scholar. But she had simply expanded. Her formidable intelligence and deep sense of justice now applied to a wider sphere. She was respected by the tenants, admired in the county for her lack of heirs, and loved by the staff who had once seen her as a pitiable fixture. He crossed the room and came to stand behind her chair, placing his hands on her shoulders. She leaned her head back against him, her smile soft and content. The baby gurgled, reaching a chubby hand up to touch his father's face. "He has your focus," Alistair said quietly, his lips brushing the top of her hair. "He will probably have the entire household accounts memorized by the time he is 5. Philippa laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. "And your stubbornness, I fear. He refused his nap with a determination worthy of a thornfield." They fell into a comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft babble of their child. This, Alistair thought, was the happiness he had not believed he deserved. It was not a grand, dramatic passion, but something far deeper and more enduring. A partnership built on a foundation of hard-won truth and profound mutual respect. He no longer saw her as a responsibility, but as the very center of his world. Later that evening, after the baby was asleep, they sat together by the fire, a companionable silence between them. Philippa was mending a small tear in one of Alistair's shirts, her fingers moving with a familiar, deft grace. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. "That day, at the inn." She looked up, her needle poised. Her gray eyes were clear, untroubled. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think of the woman who was standing by the road, so certain that her life was to be a small, quiet, lonely thing. And I feel a great deal of pity for her. She had no idea what was waiting for her." "I almost let you go," he said, the memory still capable of sending a chill through him. "I almost lived the gray, empty life I deserved." She put down her sewing and reached across, taking his hand. "But you didn't, Alistair."
You rode into the snow. You chose a different path.
"We both did." He brought her hand to his lips, just as he had done on the day she'd agreed to marry him. The gesture was no longer one of desperate hope, but of deep, abiding gratitude. He knew, with a certainty that settled in the marrow of his bones, that he would spend the rest of his days grateful for the note that had shattered his world, for the woman who had rebuilt it, and for the quiet, extraordinary love that had been waiting for him all along, hidden in plain sight. He had learned to read the silence, and in it he had found his home.